Welcome to part 1 of my Elden Ring preview. Why it's part 1? It was taking me forever to put a big long video together. I'm breaking it down into chunks so I can get you folks entertainment quicker and kind of space it out a little bit in smaller, more digestible pieces. Part 1 is going to be my general impressions after playing through the network test quite a bit, and I am still going to keep this pretty spoiler free, and I'm going to show a minimum of stuff that I had to push a little farther to see in the network test. I know a lot of other channels have been showing that kind of stuff, and hey, you know, I hope it brings them lots of views and doesn't get them in any trouble, but I'm still pretty much sticking to that in these, and I'm not going to be showing footage of that stuff in these videos. Now that being said, looking at out-of-bounds assets and making speculations about what it could mean, even involving spoilers about plot if I'm right, is something I really enjoy doing, and I know a lot of folks have enjoyed videos like that in the past. Since this is a pre-release game, I still want to go out of my way not to show anything publicly, but I'm considering maybe doing a final unlisted video or something like that, put lots of spoiler warnings on it, make it a kind of, hey, if you want to see this, because I do really enjoy doing that stuff and it's more relevant before the game's actually out and we know all the answers. So if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, let me know and I'll try to find a way to do it responsibly without being too much of a hypocrite. If you'd rather we just stick to our guns and stay totally spoiler free regardless of what anyone else is doing, by all means tell us that in the comments too. I'm just thinking about it at this point since the cat's kind of out of the bag of most of the stuff that is within the network test. All of this is captured on a base PS4, so it will look at least as good as this when you play the final game. I think it looks and runs pretty good, but just keep in mind that it's going to look at least this good when you actually play it, and it's, you know, a little limited by the quality of my capture card, but the game does look really nice in my opinion. I have a lot to say about my time with this game, so without further ado, let's get to it. I can easily say without hedging myself at all that I absolutely loved my time playing the Elden Ring network test. I have not been this grabbed by a demo or a preview version of a game since Skies of Arcadia. That was over 20 years ago, and I've participated in all the previous From Software network tests. I really feel like this game is something special, and I really enjoyed playing it. Now this is a comparison I guarantee you're going to hear a lot over the next 6 months, but this is to the Soulsborne games what Skyrim or Breath of the Wild were to those series. And that comes with good and bad depending on how you feel about it. There are a lot of changes to the formula in order to accommodate the open world design, to make it more accessible, more approachable, and I know that some people's stomachs are going to start churning just hearing that, but it's also the sort of thing of those games, everyone else loved them. And if you're the sort of fan like myself where you can kind of change a little bit with the franchises you love, in order to see them brought to a lot more people and be able to share it with a lot of your friends that might not have been that into it before when the series or whatever it was a little older and crotchetier and, you know, had kind of more of a barrier of entry, all that stuff that it's when only the nerds are into it versus the one that goes big and everyone loves it. This is going to be that for From Software's games. I can just feel it in my gut. But the thing that makes it so great is it's not necessarily that everything about it is watered down and different, but it's the freedom that the game gives you. That's always been my biggest complaint, even as a huge fan of these games for decades, that they're very arbitrary, and that goes back before even Demon's Souls. That's true of Evergrace, Kingsfield. It's been a From Software thing that you play the game the way they want you to play it. And that's honestly what encourages a lot of players like myself to find weird exploits and ways to cheese the game, because, well, I listened to way too much Rage Against the Machine in the 90s, but you get what I'm saying. I want to do things my way. And this game really lets you do that. Some of it is a little bit exploity, but that freedom and that putting the experience in the hands of the player is what made so many people enjoy Breath of the Wild who had not been that into Zelda games before because they didn't want to go through a linear dungeon. They want to do things their way. This game brings that to Soulsborne games, and I really feel like it's more of a positive addition versus the way it does, in a lot of ways, make the game easier to exploit, easier to cheese. I'm going to definitely talk about that a lot in upcoming videos. The biggest change to the Soulsborne formula, in my opinion, in Elden Ring is the complete removal of what I refer to as the Souls choke points or the funnel of difficulty. And what I mean by that is in Souls games, You'll run into points in the games where the only way you can make any kind of meaningful progress is by defeating one really difficult boss. And the only thing really available to you to do besides that is to go back and kill pretty weak at that point enemies over and over again to farm souls and make yourself more powerful. Or you just put your nose to the grindstone, fight the thing over and over again until you finally manage to kill it. And this is kind of the end of the fun for a lot of people. As someone who loves these games, people feel compelled to tell me why I couldn't get into Dark Souls stories, and most of them are pretty similar. They involve something like, I got all the way to the bottom of Blighttown, and I was rewarded with a poisonous swamp, Man-Eater Mildred, and a boss fight against Quelaag, and I just couldn't do it anymore. This game does not do that. The thing about it is, because of the open world design, unless you have nothing left to kill but the major boss of one of the large dungeons at the end of each region, which are called legacy dungeons, you will always have something else that you can do. And even if you've killed all of the other bosses, cleared the mini dungeons, cleared all of the field bosses, everything else like that, there are still large enemies that provide decent rewards that respawn around the map and are fairly challenging to take on. There are also all sorts of other little hidden activities and things you can do that are fun and are a little more than just running through the same 3 rooms again to farm souls so that you can beat a difficult boss. That change alone, I think, is going to bring so many more people to want to play this game, where they've been turned off by that before, because, well, some of us like that feeling of beating our heads against something over and over again until we master it and we feel like, we own it. I own that boss. I can take that thing anytime because I've memorized every animation it does, and that is worth it to do something 100 times, 200 times. I've heard stories of people, I don't even want to say how many times I've heard people say they've fought bosses in Soulsborne games, and it's just not worth it to everybody, and I totally understand it. This game almost will never do that to you by its design, because again, you would have to have really nothing left in the entire region. Now, this isn't a spoiler. I don't know for certain that you can't just cross into another region of the game, but just based on the previous games, I would assume that you eventually have to beat a big boss before it lets you cross into the next large area of the game. That's entirely speculation based on no spoilers, leaks, any sort of real knowledge. It just kind of makes sense that they wouldn't go that far to just letting people cheese straight to the end of the game a la Breath of the Wild. While I'm on the topic of cheesing and exploits, I should really talk about the biggest thing to a lot of people about these games, and something they're notorious for, is the difficulty. Now, this is going to be what I assume a divisive subject, because to put it frankly, this game does not necessarily have to have any difficulty at all. So, to explain, there are crafting materials and things that infinitely respawn around the world. If you wanted to, you could just ride around, pick things up, either sell them as raw ingredients to merchants or craft them into more valuable items, and you could obtain enough runes eventually to reach max level in this game and not fight a single enemy, and then you could go through completely overpowered and just steamroll everything, and there is nothing in the design to stop you from doing this. So if the concept of people who stink at video games, honestly, being able to play a Soulsborne is going to be something that is going to offend and anger you so much that you can't take it, you may just want to honestly hide under a rock, because I guarantee you there's going to be senior citizens, small children, all sorts of people that you stereotype as not good or elite that are going to have a ton of fun with this game, and they're probably going to post videos on YouTube of them playing it in a way that may seem like absolute blasphemy to some people. If that sounds like something great where you could just chill out and farm some herbs for a while in a Soulsborne game, yeah, totally. I think it's pretty cool, honestly, that there is the option to play this game as an almost complete pacifist and that people can do that. Now, another thing that is a little different is there are things like, for example, the ashes that let you summon things like these wolves you've seen me use a bunch. It's not just because they're a lot of fun, it is really handy to have anything else to distract enemies while you're fighting. And in the past, besides very specific NPC summons, you kind of had to have friends or find other people willing to play with you to have anyone else to distract enemies. You can use these not everywhere in the game, but pretty much anywhere there's a difficult enemy and within all the boss battles that I've seen. So this really takes away one of those other barriers that, for a lot of folks, if you don't have someone else to help you, it's pretty hard to make it through some of these games. Now you pretty much can buy these items really cheaply. The wolves were at the very first merchant in the network test that you encounter right away, and they were really cheap. So you could just buy these, have something to summon, and it makes the game a lot easier. There are a lot of things like that where by choice, you can take a lot of what some people consider the sacred difficulty of a Soulsborne game completely out of it. I want to be most careful about spoilers with the plot, so I'm going to just show stuff that's been in lots of official trailers and things like this. But from what I've seen, I really like it so far. It definitely has a theme that's been in a lot of, or most past From Software games, of humans have messed with something they shouldn't, and now it's messing up the natural order of things. I love it. I never get tired of that plot. It's great. One thing I did find really odd, though, is that there are a lot of plot connections between Elden Ring and an old From Software game, Evergrace, that's a personal favorite of mine. Now, I found that really weird because none of the people who wrote that game are still at From Software and wrote this game, and George R.R. Martin, I can't imagine, has played it. So, I have quite the From Software conspiracy theory that someday I may want to share, but for now, let me just say that it's a cool theme, and if you are a fan of Evergrace, you're going to see a lot that's familiar, and it's really kind of cool as a longtime fan. Now, the plot overall, I don't know that much about. I've just played the network test. From Software tried their best to keep spoilers out of it, and I've avoided stuff that's come from data mining. But it does seem to be very much in step with their previous games, even though they brought George R.R. Martin in to write it. I haven't seen a ton of what I would describe as overt influences from A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm also a big fan of that series. I was horribly scarred reading the first book when it released in 1997 when I was 12 or 13. But somehow I continued enjoying them and had my heart broken by the show and all of that. So yeah, I'm a fan of that too. I'm fairly aware of it. And I definitely felt more Souls than George R.R. Martin's normal writing, if you're familiar with elements of that. So we'll see how it, eventually turns out when the game releases. But some really cool themes so far, and I'm really excited about it. That'll about do it for part 1. I'll try to get part 2 up in the very near future, which is going to be about glitches and exploits and how I expect they will affect gameplay. And I'm going to be talking a lot about the new at-will jump function without the need for a running start, and the addition of your mount torrent. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about things that are still around from previous games that you may be used to exploiting either for your benefit or for the detriment of players you're invading. But just to wrap this one up, I'm sure I'm not the first, and I will not be the last, to call this the Breath of the Wild of Soulsborne games, and it's an apt comparison not just because it's an open world game, but also because it definitely makes a lot of changes to the gameplay to create more approachability, but it's also going to, I think, attract millions more people than it's going to turn off, and this game is going to be a huge success and a lot of people are going to enjoy it. That's just my take, but look for more in the near future. I'm Ryan, this is Deconstructing the Game, thanks for watching.